Breaking news now. UN chief. Millions will suffer as a result of Russia's withdrawal from the grain deal. After Russia pulled out of the Ukraine grain deal, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said on Monday that millions of people will pay the price in the form of increased hunger. At the UN headquarters in New York, he told reporters that Moscow's decision will strike a blow to people in need everywhere. Hundreds of millions of people are going hungry, and shoppers around the world are experiencing a crisis in their ability to make ends meet. The price will be high for them, Guterres warned. The UN chief said he was saddened by Russia's decision but that the organization would continue working to facilitate the unimpeded access of Ukrainian and Russian agricultural products to international markets. The future of global food security and food price stability must remain our top priority. Given the increase in human suffering that will inevitably result from today's decision, he said, this will remain the focus of my efforts. After sending Russian President Vladimir Putin a letter last week with a new proposal to keep the initiative alive, Guterres was disappointed to learn that his letter went unheeded. A subsidiary of Russia's main agricultural bank, whose operations are hampered by sanctions, requested reconnection to the global SWIFT banking system in a letter whose contents had not been made public until now. Russia's exports of grain and fertilizer have been hampered by sanctions for quite some time, and the country has long complained that its conditions for extending the initiative have not been met. In a letter to Putin, Guterres noted progress, writing, Russian grain trade has reached high export volumes and fertilizer markets are stabilizing with Russian exports nearing full recovery. U.S. Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield had earlier made the accusation that Russia was holding humanity hostage by pulling out of the grain deal. Russia, she said, had dealt another blow to the world's most vulnerable, only a week after it had blocked renewal of a key aid route to Syria that is a lifeline for millions of people living in rebel-held areas of the country. This is really another act of cruelty, Thomas-Greenfield said of the abandoned grain deal. While Russia plays political games, real people will suffer, she continued. Germany has formally requested that the export agreement for Ukrainian grain be extended with Russia. We continue to appeal to Russia, to make a further extension of the grain agreement possible and not to settle this dispute on the backs of the poorest on this planet, Christiane Hoffmann, the federal government's deputy spokeswoman in Berlin, said. The federal government is counting on the fact that there will be long-term export opportunities for grain and fertilizers from the Ukraine in the future, in addition to short-term agreements. The Kremlin had already announced that the grain deal was de facto dead. Few hours before the existing agreement expired, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said in Moscow that Russia would revive the agreement immediately, as long as the agreements with the Russian side were kept. Ukraine is now able to export grain across the Black Sea thanks to a ratified and twice extended agreement first signed in Istanbul in July 2022. In 2017, Ukraine's ports shipped out nearly 33 million metric tons of grain. Moscow had been hinting for weeks that they would simply let the agreement lapse. The Russian side is upset because it is unable to export as much fertilizer and food as it would like. Putin takes the poor hostage, according to Zdemir. German cabinet members are also critical of the Russian attitude. According to Federal Agriculture Minister Cem Zdemir, President Vladimir Putin is holding the poorest of the poor in this world hostage for his horrible warmongering. Hunger can no longer be used as a weapon. According to Zdemir, it was inevitable that Putin would terminate the agreement. To get Ukrainian grain to European seaports by rail and road, the alternative export routes and their expansion are now all the more important. Make yourself immune to Putin's whims, as Schulz put it. The German Minister for Development, Svenja Schulz, commented on the situation in Berlin, saying that it proved once again that Putin ultimately doesn't care about world hunger or the concerns of developing countries. She argued that a year ago, the world was more susceptible to the effects of a blockade than it is now. Schulz argues that Ukrainian grain has the potential to reduce food prices around the world and help alleviate hunger. For the future, Russia can use wheat as a weapon, and Russia will do so. An important takeaway from all this unpredictability is that one has to make oneself less dependent on Putin's arbitrariness. Rather than buying wheat on the international market, developing countries should increase their own production. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine began, Germany has stood by them. Erdogan and Putin to meet, he says. President Erdogan of Turkey believes an extension will be reached. As Erdogan explained to reporters, he believes Russian President Vladimir Putin still supports keeping this humanitarian bridge open despite today's announcement. He declared that he would meet with Putin. Before the Russian president's scheduled August visit to Turkey, an extension of the agreement is possible, he said. Discussions to this end have already begun. The global food supply was less disrupted because of the agreement to export Ukrainian grain after the Russian war of aggression. Ukraine is a major global player in the grain industry. Many of the grains agreement's exports went to developing nations in Africa and the Middle East.